Margaret stood in the dusty attic, surrounded by cardboard boxes and 50 years of memories. At 72 years old, she thought she knew everything about her late husband, James. But she was wrong. Behind an old trunk, tucked beneath the floorboards, she discovered a small wooden box. What was inside would change everything she thought she knew about their life together. Margaret had lived in the same house for 50 years. The house where she raised her 3 children. The house where she laughed, cried, and grew old with James. 20 years had passed since James died suddenly of a heart attack. 20 long years of loneliness, of quiet dinners alone, of going to bed without his gentle snoring beside her. Her children had been urging her to sell the house. "It's too big for you, Mom," they said. "You should move into something smaller, something easier to manage." They were right, of course. The stairs were getting harder to climb. The yard was too much to maintain. And every room held memories that were both beautiful and painful. So she had finally agreed. The real estate agent would come next week. But first, she needed to go through the attic, one last time. The attic smelled of old wood and forgotten things. Margaret moved slowly, sorting through boxes. Old photographs, Christmas decorations, her children's baby clothes. Then she saw it. Behind an old steamer trunk, a loose floorboard. She'd never noticed it before. Curious, she pulled at it. Underneath, wrapped in cloth, was a small wooden box. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were letters. Dozens of letters. All addressed to her. All in James's handwriting. But these weren't letters she'd ever received. These were letters he'd written but never sent. The first one was dated July 15, 1968, just 2 months before they got married. With tears already forming, Margaret began to read. "My dearest Margaret," it began. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said months ago, but I was afraid. Afraid you might leave me. Afraid you might think less of me." Margaret's heart raced. What secret had James kept from her all these years? She read on. "I grew up in poverty. My father abandoned us when I was 5. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. I told you my father died when I was young, that was a lie. The truth is, he left us. And I was so ashamed." Tears streamed down Margaret's face. She had known James came from humble beginnings, but she never knew about his father. "But there was more. I never went to college, Margaret. I told you I had a degree in accounting, but I learned everything on the job. I was so afraid you wouldn't want to marry someone without a college education. Your family was so accomplished, and I was nobody." Margaret's hands shook. She thought back to all those years. James had been such a hard worker, so dedicated to providing for their family. And all that time, he carried this secret. Margaret opened another letter, dated 20 years later, 1988. "My love," it read. "Today is our 20th anniversary. You don't know this, but 6 months ago, I almost lost my job. The company was downsizing. I was terrified of disappointing you, of not being able to provide." Margaret gasped. She remembered that year. James had been stressed, distant. She thought he was just tired. But something happened, the letter continued. "The CEO called me into his office. I thought I was being fired. Instead, he promoted me. He said I was the hardest worker he'd ever seen. That my dedication was unmatched. I wanted to tell you, but I was embarrassed that I'd been so scared. So I just pretended everything was normal. But Margaret, you should know, every success I ever had was because of you. Because I wanted to be worthy of you." More letters. More secrets. Not scandals or betrayals, but intimate fears and insecurities James had carried alone. There was a letter from 1995, after their daughter's wedding. "I cried today," he wrote. "Watching Sarah walk down the aisle. I thought about you walking toward me on our wedding day. I was the luckiest man alive then. I'm still the luckiest man alive now." Margaret sobbed openly now. How had she never known James felt this deeply? Then she found the last letter. It was dated just 2 weeks before he died. Her hands trembled as she opened it. My dearest Margaret, it began. I'm writing this because I've been having chest pains. I'm too stubborn to see a doctor, you know how I am. But if something happens to me, I need you to know this. You were my everything. Every morning I woke up next to you was a gift. Every smile, every laugh, every quiet evening together was more than I ever deserved. I know I wasn't always expressive. I know I kept my feelings locked away. That's how my father was, and I learned from him the wrong lessons. But I loved you with every breath. I loved you in the morning coffee I made just the way you liked it. I loved you in the way I always took the trash out without complaining. I loved you in every small act of service, because I didn't know how to say it with words. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And I'm sorry. Sorry I didn't tell you all this while I was alive. Sorry I didn't hold you more. Sorry I didn't say I love you every single day. But know this, you made my life worth living. Every single day with you was a blessing. Please don't mourn too long. Find joy again. Laugh again. Live again. Because that's what you did for me. You taught me how to live. All my love, forever and always, James. Margaret sat in the dusty attic, clutching the letters to her chest, crying tears that were both sad and joyful. For 20 years, she'd wondered if James had really loved her. They'd been married for so long, and he'd become quiet, distant in his later years. She wondered if he'd regretted their life together. Now she knew the truth. He'd loved her more than she ever imagined. He just didn't know how to show it. Margaret looked around the attic, at the house she'd been preparing to leave. Suddenly, she didn't want to anymore. This house wasn't just wood and nails. It was 50 years of James's love. Every wall he painted, every shelf he built, every repair he made. He'd been telling her he loved her all along. She just hadn't understood his language. Margaret gathered the letters carefully, placing them back in the wooden box. She carried them downstairs and called her children. I've changed my mind, she told them. I'm not selling the house. Her daughter protested. Mom, are you sure? It's so much for you to handle. Margaret smiled through her tears. I'm sure. This house is full of love. Your father's love, and I'm not ready to leave that behind. That evening, Margaret sat in her favorite chair, the one next to the fireplace, where James used to sit with his crossword puzzles. She opened the wooden box and read the letters again. This time, she didn't cry. She smiled, because now she understood. Love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's hidden. Sometimes it's in the small things we do every day. And sometimes, it waits 50 years to be discovered. But it's always there. Margaret decided she would write back to James. Not letters he would ever read, but letters for herself, acknowledging his love, sharing her own feelings she'd kept hidden. She pulled out her old stationery and began to write. My dearest James, I found your letters today. And I finally understand. I love you too. I always did. I always will. Thank you for loving me, in your own quiet way. Forever yours, Margaret. She placed her letter in the box with his, closed the lid, and set it on the mantel, where it would stay, a reminder that love never truly dies. It just waits to be remembered.